Hey, Jen. I don't know how long I'm gonna be able to tolerate this light, but I don't want to be sitting in the dark here. Hello. Hello, everybody. Hey, Bonnie Scott. I am here to talk about Aries. I'm here to talk about it. I'm going to talk about Aries. Hey, Hoodoo Huncho. I'm going to talk about Aries in general. And I want to try to talk about how Aries shows up for each of the 12 signs. That might make this long, but you know, we've got to give Aries some attention because we're experiencing that sign in quite a new way right now. And via lots of different transits going on all at once. So I'm Dayna. If you don't know, of course you know, you follow me. I'm the People's Oracle. Tell a friend, invite a friend, tell a friend to come on and listen. Let's start real quick with describing what a sign is. I find that while a sign or a zodiac sign, or in this particular situation, a sidereal zodiac sign, is not very well understood. And, well, hello, Migrant Melly. Migrant? Welcome. I find that there is no succinct or clear, direct, consistent description of what a zodiac sign is and how it functions. So we have to start there, kind of like we got to define the term so we know what we're talking about, so that you know what I'm talking about. So I lay down the proper context. Hey, best friend Winter. So what is a zodiac sign? In Divination For Liberation Sidereal Astrology, which is what we're doing here, we are not doing tropical. So that's also really, really important. The things I'm going to share here today are not applicable to tropical Aries. You will find yourself confused and not really being able to apply this broadly if you try to apply what I'm saying to tropical. This is sidereal. So what is a zodiac sign and what is its function? Let's get through this real quick. In Divination For Liberation Sidereal Astrology, a zodiac sign is a place where a planet lives. And in this place, right, this sign is pointing to other planets. So a sidereal zodiac sign, or a sign's function, is to, excuse me, establish a hierarchy of relationship and survival priorities. A sign, any planet in a sign, is merely pointing to the ruler of that sign. If you have the moon in Aries, your moon is pointing to Mars. And in your personal hierarchy of relationship and survival priorities, Mars is above the moon. So you must survive Mars. You need whatever Mars is. You have Mars types experiences. Your relationships are Mars. That's what you deal with if you have moon in Aries. So in your personal relationship survival hierarchy, if you have any planet or placement in Mars, in Aries, including Mars itself, it is saying that Mars is here. Autonomy, a sense of a separate self, a sense of a separate body is more important than moon. more important than mom, more important than your body, and being attuned and present to and aware of your body. So anyone who has any placement or planet in Aries, it is giving Mars power and a higher position than other planets in your birth chart in your personal relationship survival hierarchy. So if you are just joining me here, I am explaining to you what a zodiac sign is, particularly a sidereal zodiac sign in the Divination for Liberation framework. A sidereal zodiac sign establishes a hierarchy of relationship survival priorities. So every placement in your chart, the sign that it occupies, is pointing to a planet and establishing a power-based relationship. What did you need to survive? What kinds of experiences have shaped your world? What was the relationship and relational environment that you had to survive from birth, primarily the first 11 years of life, okay? So each sign has three major components. We've already talked about the first component, or I've already introduced the first component, which is a planet. A sign's primary function is to point to a planet. Yes, Philly baby, I am accepting new clients. There are openings in my schedule right now. You can click the link in my bio to book a reading. Okay? So signs' primary function is to point to a planet. What is a planet, and what is the planet that Aries points to? That's the first thing we're going to cover. Then we're going to talk about the second two ways that we categorize and understand a sign, and that is based on its tool, which you may know as an element, and I will define what that is when we get to it, and that is based on its task, which you may understand as a mode. And again, I will explain what that is. So each sign is kind of comprised of these three components: a planet, a tool, and a task. Start with the planet. Planets are people. They are the relationship dynamics that we have with people. And most importantly, planets represent the building blocks of a self. I'm going to say that again. Planets are people. Planets are the dynamics of our relationships with people. And most importantly, planets are the building blocks of the self. Okay? So when we put that all together, what I'm really saying is that a planet as a building block of the self is formed, shaped, and molded inside relationship. And the sign that a planet occupies in your birth chart, of course, along with aspects, is telling you how that planet, that building block of yourself, has been shaped and formed and molded inside your most important relationships, which are those that have to do with your material, psychological, and emotional survival the first 11 years of life. Okay? So the planet that Aries points to is Mars. And what this is really saying is that Aries is an expression of Mars. Aries is the relational experience of one aspect of Mars. Okay? So let's talk about what Mars is, right? If you're just joining me, I'm talking about Aries, and I spent a few minutes explaining what a sidereal zodiac sign is. If you're too late to have heard that, a sidereal zodiac sign points to a planet and it establishes a hierarchy of relationship and survival priorities of planets. And planets are a fundamental building block of self. Planets are building blocks of ourself that are shaped inside of relationships, and the sign is telling us how that building block of ourself is shaped in relationships, right? So what building block of self is Mars? 2 words define Mars. No, it's not war. That's a social construct. Very good. So Mars is autonomy, self-governance, to be governed by one's own will and consciousness. And Mars is separateness. It is the experience of the survival-based necessity for having a separate self and body. Okay? In my Wombs and Gifts workshop, every planet, every tool, every task, and every sign has a wound, gift, and coping strategy. Wound is a experience that you have inside of a relationship that in its most neutral form is absolutely required to develop that building block of self. Wounds can be malignant or benign, and they can be willful or passive. In 2023, wounds almost always come wrapped in the clothing of patriarchy, whiteness, and capitalism. Okay? So when we're talking about Mars, we must understand that our autonomy and sense of separate self and body and mind is being shaped and formed inside relationships that must survive capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy. Okay? So, the wound of Mars is abandonment. Now remember, I know that you have a very specific way that you understand the word abandonment, and you probably understand abandonment to be something negative. But because this is English and we have limited language, I'm going to be careful to define every word that I use here. So I want you to set aside your trauma-informed understanding of the word abandonment, and however it may show up in common vernacular. I want you to understand the wound of Mars, the experience inside relationship that is necessary in the most neutral form to develop, shape, and form and bring into existence autonomy, right? Which is Mars, right? The gift of Mars. So the wound of Mars is abandonment, and abandonment literally means to be left alone. To be left alone. Now remember, wounds, in this case, the wound of Mars, abandonment can be malignant or benign. It can be willful or passive. It can be neutral. A neutral form of abandonment as the wound of Mars would be the normal, developmentally age appropriate, increasing time that a mother has away from their child. Abandonment becomes malignant when mom does not return. When dad does not return. When the caregiver, whoever, does not return. Okay? Why do we need abandonment? Because we need to know that we are going to be okay alone. And the only way that we can know that we are going to be okay alone is if we get left and they come back. So we associate the leaving with the coming back. You get me? Okay? So this is the first part of Aries. The planet that Aries points to, answers to, and is the wound of abandonment. Now let's talk about the coping strategy. The coping strategy is how we survive the wound, whether the wound is malignant, benign, passive, or willful, or neutral, okay? Generally, the coping strategy can be doing to ourselves or others what has been done to us in the wound, right? For good or for ill. So we cope with abandonment, which in the most neutral terms means to be left alone, by severing. Snip, snip, separate. Now, in a developmental way, this is absolutely appropriate. At some point, you leave your parents in some way, shape, or form, right? But severance can also be a way that we harness control and power over someone else's ability to abandon us. And we'll get to this when we start talking about the Aries task, which is cardinal. Okay? So the coping strategy of Mars is severance. And it is I can leave and maybe come back. Okay? The gift, which is the thing that is being developed by the wound, is autonomy, which is self-governance. Okay? Are we clear? Let me know if you have any questions. Let's move on to the task of Aries. Tasks you may have heard as modes, but I'm a big believer that words should give you a sense of what they are, right? Cardinal, mode, that means nothing to most people. Lucky for you, I spent a lot of time creating a vocabulary and language to better describe these things that we're talking about in astrology. A task or a mode, there's three of them, cardinal, fixed, and mutable. A task is telling us what has been the nature of the experiences that I have inside relationship. What kind of experience am I having? What is the task? What is this thing that I need, right? And that I am receiving it, conjuring it up, manifesting it in some way, developing it inside relationship. Okay? All right? Just pulling up my notes so I don't forget nothing. The cardinal task is, ooh, and I see you, Performance Temple. I know I didn't respond to your email because I'm terrible at that, but I got you. I got you today when I get off, or tomorrow. Let me not play myself, but I'm gonna try for today. Anyways, cardinal signs, there are 4 of them: Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. And the cardinal task, which is also the gift, is control or regulation. There is a wound, gift, and coping strategy for the cardinal task. So we have Aries, which is ruled by or answers to or points to Mars. And y'all funny. I see you done detailed. I also have to have money to pay an assistant unless you're trying to work for something else. So if you're trying to work for something else, let me know. Anyways, Aries ruled by Mars. We laid down the wound, coping strategy, and gift of Mars, which is abandonment, severance, or to sever, and autonomy. Now we're focused on the task of Aries, which is cardinal. A task is a mode, but it's more specifically describing the types of experiences that we have in relationships. Okay? The wound of all cardinal signs, Aries, Capricorn, Libra, and Cancer, is neglect. Now, again, negative connotation with the word, but that's the best language that I have. Remember, a wound is neutral, right? And for the cardinal task, the wound of neglect is to not have something done for you that you probably need to be done, right? Now remember, this wound is really a state of need. This wound is a state of need, right? If the wound of Mars is abandonment, it is being in a state of need. No matter what the nature of the abandonment is for Mars, all Mars signs, Aries or Scorpio too, the state of need is I need you to come back. I need to know that you're going to come back. So the wound experience is neutral at best, but it can be malignant. It could be benign. You see me? You see what I'm saying? So neglect is the same way. Neglect as a wound is being in a state of need, right? Ultimately, cardinal signs are trying to get to a sense of control, right? The coping strategy, remember, a coping strategy is how we internalize the wound, or how we respond to the wound, or how we enact the wound on other people or ourselves. The coping strategy of cardinal signs, which is the task of Aries, is dysregulation. So dysregulation in its most simple sense is a state of being out of control, right? Dysregulation as a coping strategy is the way that we communicate that need. Did y'all catch that? Dysregulation as the coping strategy for cardinal signs Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn is how we communicate that need. Okay? It's a feeling of being out of control. It is a need to be in control, for regulation, right? And the gift of cardinal signs is to control or regulate. So far, let's add them together. Let's put this together. We've got Aries, which is ruled by Mars, and it's a cardinal sign. So we have the wounds of abandonment and neglect. Then we have the coping strategies of severing and dysregulation. Are y'all catching the picture? That Aries relational experiences have been abandonment and neglect, for good or ill. A good kind of neglect, and I know y'all gonna have issues with this word, but you're just gonna have to deal with it. A good kind of neglect is you're learning to walk and I'm not gonna carry you. Nope, you do it yourself. That's some dysregulation. Them knees, them kneecaps, them muscles and tendons behind your knees and those muscles in your toes, they're not going to develop if I carry you, right? But if we make that malignant, right? If we make that malignant neglect, malignant abandonment, malignant neglect and abandonment is stop all that crying. Why are you making all of that noise? I'm going to leave you to cry it out. What is the it that is being cried out when you leave a baby to cry it out. What do you want the baby to cry out? What do you want the baby to get rid of? Moving on, because I'm not about to get on my soapbox right now. I'm going to stay focused, okay? So for Aries, the ruler Mars coping strategy is to sever, and its task, Cardinal's coping strategy, is dysregulation. You can find all of this and so much more in my workshop, the Wounds and Gifts workshop. I'm going to put that on sale. Matter of fact, I'm going to put that on sale right now. Don't tell me I got to log in. Bruh. Nope, I don't. Okay? So, coping strategy of Mars is autonomy, self-governance, to be in control of oneself, to govern oneself, to be under the auspices of one's own will instead of an external authority, okay? So we have autonomy and control. So basically we're saying Mars is autonomy, okay? And Mars, as a planet which is a fundamental building block of self, autonomy, right, is developed through abandonment in the most neutral way possible, but also in malignant and benign ways, to be left alone. How can you be autonomous if you are never left alone? So those of you who have codependent tendencies, it is because you were never left alone. You were never given the gift of autonomy. You were never separated from long enough for the adult to come back in a way that has meaning and establishing a sense of security in your own self and abilities to survive. And also to know that being alone is a temporary state. So for those of you who have Mars prominent or dominant in your birth chart, or who have Aries or Scorpio stelliums in your birth chart, right? Meaningfully being left alone, meaningful abandonment as the wound of Mars, is to be left alone and to know that someone's going to come back. Okay? And then the gift, we have autonomy and control. So that's implying that a form of autonomy is to have a sense of control and regulation, to be able to sever, right? That's another way to really understand the gift too. You can wield that coping strategy as needed rather than as a compulsion, rather than as a protective mechanism always. Sometimes you need to protect yourself and sever. Sometimes we sever, us Mars dominant people or people who have dominant Aries, Mars in the first house, right? We sever compulsively because we have been abandoned in a way where the person never came back, and we don't have the tolerance to wait and see if a new person we're trying to form an attachment with is going to come back when we separate. That was a word and somebody's going to catch it. Let's move on to the tool of Aries, which is fire. The tool is an element. And a tool is saying, what are these experiences, these tasks I've been set to have, these experiences that I'm having? What have they given me to survive? When I open up my toolkit, the tools, you have a dominant tool, right, in your birth chart. The tool is what you have been given to survive. If you got a lot of fire in your chart, your relationship and survival toolkit, right, has a lot of fire in it. The wound of fire is invalidation. And what that means is often, what that means for fire signs, Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, is that there is a kind of, there's a way that what would be age appropriate is not recognized. That's very specifically how it shows up for Aries. It is not age appropriate for your mother to leave you and go back to work after 6 weeks. So when I talk about wounds, which are just the relational experiences that help us to shape and form these fundamental building blocks of self, these fundamental parts of who we are, wounds are in your birth chart for the sign, the planet, the tool, the task, are talking about how are you surviving capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy? What is the form, the means by which you are developing into a person? Right? So invalidation is basically a refusal to acknowledge who or what someone is. It's not erasure, because that's just being ignored and disregarded altogether. You're recognized, you are in somebody's gaze, you are being acknowledged, but you are not being acknowledged in a way that is appropriate or right or fair, right? And sometimes it is right or fair, because remember, a wound can be neutral. I want to jump to the gift of fire just so when I talk about the coping strategy, it'll make sense. Remember, Aries is a fire sign, so is Leo and Sagittarius. The gift of fire is a healthy sense of entitlement to take up space and act and be in accordance with one's own sense of self and the world, identity, perceptions, judgments. The gift of fire is entitlement, and that is to take up space, to be a force of change that realizes its impact and influence on the material and social environment. So that wound of invalidation means that fire signs, and in this case Aries, don't get a proper sense of what their impact and influence is. This is why the coping strategy of fire signs is an exaggeration of one's abilities, influence, and impact. Now remember, this is not always a bad thing. I always like to talk about a toddler walking because it is the best example. If I, with my fresh and mushy kneecaps that are just hardening enough to hold the weight of my body, do not exaggerate my abilities, I will not walk. You have to exaggerate your abilities and your sense of what you're capable of in order to do something that you've never done, right? It's a way that we can have a will to do something, to be something, even if we have no evidence or permission to do so. So the coping strategy of fire signs, Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius is an exaggeration of abilities and influence. Now that can go real left too, right? So let's pull all of these three together. Let's pull together the wound coping strategy gift of Mars, the wound coping strategy and gift of cardinal signs, and the wound coping strategy and gift of the fire tool. And that's going to give us what the wound coping strategy and gift of Aries is. Are you with me? You with me, class? Class is in session. Bet you didn't know, right? If you are just joining me, if this is new, if you're watching the replay, this is Divination for Liberation, Sidereal Astrology. Nothing I'm saying applies to your tropical birth chart. When I say that Divination for Liberation, Sidereal Astrology is something different, this is a well thought out, cohesive framework that is consistently applicable. Consistently. The maths on time, every time. Okay? And if you are watching this and you are unfamiliar with your sidereal birth chart, you can go to the link in my bio and you can click the link that says Sidereal Birth Chart, Class Your Sidereal Birth Chart, or you can go to thepeoplesoracle.com and go to the menu and click the link there, and there will be instructions to teach you how to cast your sidereal birth chart using astro.com. If you are going to engage in the Divination for Liberation framework, until I get my own app, astro.com is what I'm going to suggest. It is a robust, free website that allows you to create the correct specifications for how I use astrology and the framework under which this system, the type of chart this system requires to use, okay? So we're going to put together the wound and coping strategy and gift of Mars, the cardinal task, and the fire tool, which are all the three components of Aries. And then we'll get a new wound and coping strategy and gift, which is specific to Aries. Okay? So the wound of Aries, we talked about Mars abandonment. We talked about cardinal signs neglect. And we talked about fire signs invalidation. So let's talk about this in the negative sense, in the malignant sense. In the malignant sense, or the malignant relationship experience, sidereal Aries experiences have been those of abandonment, neglect, and invalidation. Abandonment in the malignant sense means somebody left and never came back. Neglect in the malignant sense means you were in a state of need and nobody came. Invalidation as the wound of fire in the malignant way means that you were not permitted to develop something in an age-appropriate way. So this means altogether that the wound of Aries is to be disowned. Now, again, if we move this to a more neutral experience, to be disowned means that sometimes you need to experience yourself as not somebody's child. Sometimes you need to experience yourself as your own person, and you need that experience in order to get to autonomy. But of course, in the malignant sense, the wound of Aries as being disowned means that somebody might have literally left you, never came back with needs that they could not meet, which meant that you were invalidated and probably had to do something on your own that was age inappropriate. What might this look like? A parent leaving you and never coming back because they were incarcerated, went and got with somebody else, did not want to be with the other parent, or died, were on drugs, or otherwise had to work. This is one that's very common with Aries. What's very common with Aries is that mom or dad or the parents had to work. So the invalidation is about you were too young to be left alone for as long as you were left alone. Somebody was supposed to come back at the right interval of time and they did not come back. And so that invalidation meant that you had no real sense of what you should be doing, right? So this is why when we get to the coping strategy of Aries, we have severance, right? You were left, so I'ma leave. We have dysregulation. I was neglected, so I neglect myself. I had a need for someone to come back and they did not come back. So I am going to leave and not come back so you won't leave me, right? And this right here, for all of my folks out here with sidereal Aries placements, for all of my folks out here who have Mars in the same sign as your midheaven or Mars in the same sign as your ascendant, this is where your healing is. Your healing is giving other people a chance to come back. The person who left you is not coming back. But does that mean that you will leave everyone before they have a chance to leave and come back? Your healing is in the waiting for them to come back. Your healing is in growing a tolerance for that time because your nervous system has been programmed to believe that they are not coming back. And I'm sorry, they didn't come back. Okay? So the exaggeration of abilities and influence for Aries is often, I can do it by myself. Hyper independence. I'm going to be alone. I don't need a relationship. I just need a connection. I don't need a commitment. I don't get attached. An exaggeration of Aries' abilities and influence is also the capacity to take risks and do things that you've never done before. Because another way that Aries gets developed is, especially when you have Mars in its own sign, right? You get a real sense of what you're capable of because you were allowed to. But most of us don't know what we're actually capable of. We only know what we were obligated to do because someone else abdicated themselves willfully or passively from their responsibility to show up for us, meet a need, and come back after leaving in an age-appropriate way. So if you have Moon in Aries, where did your mama go that she did not come back soon enough for your nervous system to register that people who leave come back? Where did your mother go, Moon in Aries? Sun in Aries, where did your father go? Venus in Aries, where did the acceptance and love go? Go and come back. It doesn't have to be emotionally unavailable, because work in and of itself is often a kind of severance. We're talking about capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy. Your mama couldn't wear you on her back and nurse you and put you to sleep when you needed it. She stayed away much longer. So you really have to understand that the malignant forms of abandonment are primary in capitalism, because capitalism requires an untimely severance between mother and child for a certain class of people in order to continue. So yeah, everybody experiences a parent leaving, right? And not coming back. But in capitalism, for most of us, the parent who leaves and doesn't come back is because they got to work at 6 weeks. Or it might be an illness, or it could be a death, or it could be postpartum depression that often comes because mom has their own wounds of abandonment that make them fear attaching to their own child. And rightly so. So the coping strategy of Aries is recklessness. And this is really not knowing what you're capable of, because there was no proper container. There was no proper container for your autonomy to develop. Right? Now, recklessness is not always negative, right? Recklessness can be your old wobbly knees and you trying to walk. Oops, you bust a couple of teeth. It's all right, you get up, you keep walking, try again. Recklessness is also, I'm going to compulsively cut hoes off before they can cut me off. Recklessness is also, I'm going to do what I want to do because I can, without any regard for how it may impact other people, without any regard for my own safety and well-being. Because remember, the coping strategy is internalized neglect. It's also, I'm never going to attach. I'm never going to be vulnerable. I'm never going to allow someone to get close enough so that they leave and don't come back. I'm never going to allow anyone to get close enough for them to leave and never come back. And if I do, I will leave first. I might leave and come back and leave and come back. And now we got a little avoidant, disorganized attachment style. The gift of Aries. Now remember, the Mars, we have autonomy. Cardinal task, control and regulation. Fire signs, a sense of entitlement. You gotta be entitled to walk. You don't, a baby can't even talk. So they're not gonna be like, Mommy, can I walk now? Can I walk? Is it okay if I use my legs to walk across the room? Mommy, can I grab your hair? Is it okay if I grab your hair? No, I just discovered that I got these little things attached to my arms that I can control and move autonomously. And so I am going to autonomously grab and hold what I just discovered that I'm capable of with my own strength and power. Right? So Aries, the gift is strength and power. Very good. I wanted to go through all 12 signs, but I don't think that's a very good use of time. I think the best use of time is for you to ask me questions. So I think the best use of this time is for you to ask me questions about Aries. What do you want to know about Aries? And I will tell you what I know about Aries. If you're just joining us, while you're getting your questions together, most of what all of what I've talked about today is in the wounds, gifts, and coping strategies workshop, the wounds and gifts workshop. And I am actually going to make the wounds and gifts workshop. Let me do a little math here. I'm going to make the wounds and gifts workshop. Put your question in the question box, y'all, so that I can make sure I get to everybody, okay? I'm going to make it 40% off, okay? I see a lot of questions in this chat stream, but I'm going to prioritize the questions in the question box. Oops. What happened here? Did I save? Why isn't it showing up here? Oh, there we go. Okay, let's see here. Great question. Mid-20s Dreamer asked, why do you say Aries sets the pace? Excellent question. Aries sets the pace because Aries moves, acts, and does based on autonomy, which is self-governance. You must understand this within the context of the other cardinal signs. What is the motivation for control, which is the gift of cardinal signs, for the other 3 cardinal signs? Of particular importance is Libra. Libra, if Aries, Mars, autonomy, separateness, Libra, Venus, connection, togetherness, right? If my Aries whatever is the modus operandi, the MO is separateness, then I'm not going to turn around and ask other people, how fast are we going? I mean, think of it this way. There are speed limits so that there is consideration for the fact that there are multiple people driving. I actually described this really well in the May monthly summary of the 2023 Sidereal Astrology Guide. April, not May. Yet if we are each the all-powerful masters of our own individual fates, if we are all autonomous and free and in control, which is the Aries thing, what happens when one person's will conflicts with another person's will? Whose will wins out? Whose omnipotence is more potent? Whose omniscience is more prescient, right? So I say Aries sets the pace because if we're on the expressway, there's a speed limit, and speed limits are a social construct that allow each individual car to move in a way that acknowledges that there are other cars on the road, right? There's a flow of traffic. Everybody's got their own car and they're in control of the wheel, right? But I don't have to follow the speed limit. My car can go 120 miles an hour. And as a matter of fact, If the speed limit is 55 and I decide to go 70, best believe a whole bunch of other people gonna be like, fuck that 55 miles an hour, let's go 70, right? That's how it works, right? So Aries sets the pace. This is in many ways an antidote for codependence and powerlessness. Because the whole point of cardinal signs is, how do I harness strength and power? How do I get control? Libra is going to try to create a consensus. Libra is going to check and see what other people are doing. Libra is going to be strategic. But that's not Aries. Think of Muhammad Ali, Cancer rising, Mars and Saturn and Aries in the 10th house on the midheaven. Does he look and see how other people are boxing? Didn't I just give you your time? Okay. You should have it now. Yeah. Okay. See ya. Right? Muhammad Ali, Saturn and Mars and Aries in the 10th house. That man was fast and strong. Does he ask for permission on how he's going to hit? Shaquille O'Neal, Aries rising, Venus and Mars. That man is 7 foot tall. Who is he asking permission for? Nobody even has his body, right? So a big part of Aries is understanding the uniqueness of your capabilities based on your own will, your own stamina, your own body, your own mind, right? And moving and acting and doing in accordance with that. This is why Mars is change. The gift of entitlement for fire signs to take up space, right? To feel my impact and influence. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Hello, MB. Any tips for overcoming that self-neglect abandonment? The dysregulation is real. So I'm going to talk to you because I have Mars as the most elevated planet in my birth chart, meaning it is in the same sign as my midheaven, and I got other stuff in the same sign as my midheaven, but it is the closest to my midheaven, right? So this means that Mars is prominent for me, even though it's not in Aries. So that wound coping strategy and gift of Mars is real loud for me, okay? So the dysregulation for Aries and anyone who is Mars dominant or prominent, the dysregulation is the feeling of loss of control when you feel and experience yourself as separate. And this loss of control, subconsciously or consciously, is that they have left and they are not coming back. Or maybe they didn't leave and you have gotten so close that you fear that they are going to leave and not come back. So dysregulation is fundamentally a feeling of being out of control, lack of control, or loss of control. So the first step is to acknowledge that you need to feel in control. And most of the behaviors that are in contrast to what you really want, which is probably intimacy, closeness, and stability and commitment, right? Most of those behaviors that prevent you from having that are around control issues. So you have to acknowledge that control is a fundamental human need. And you have to acknowledge that closeness probably feels like you're not in control because someone else has the power to leave and not come back. So you're gonna leave, and then you realize, oops, and so you go back, but then you feel close again. How can you maintain your sense of separateness inside an intimate relational space? These are questions you need to ask and answer and seek out for yourself, right? What are the behaviors you're engaging in as a manifestation of dysregulation, which is a feeling of loss of control over whether someone else is going to leave or stay, whether or not they've left. That's where it starts. And to feel where in your body, what is the emotional, physical experience that you're having of dysregulation? It might just be irritation. It might just be annoyance. It might just be irritability. That's where you start. Okay, let's see here. Do you believe that Aries placement in a chart can determine if a person will live a solitary life or desire one? So here's the thing. I was just talking about this to a client who has Venus in Aries yesterday. And here's the thing. The idea of a relationship, a committed relationship of some kind, is both attractive, and we're indoctrinated into wanting it and desiring it. And many of us believe that we are entitled to it. Some of us don't, right? But one thing that I understand very clearly in my 18 years as being an astrologer is that, damn, has it been 18 years? Something like that. Is that for many of us, there are often things that are more important than intimacy and togetherness. For many of us, there are things that are more important than conforming inside the available social constructs for relating. Sometimes what's more important is to be our authentic self. And within capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy, sometimes that authentic self is deemed undesirable or deemed as a target of violence, death, and deprivation. Sometimes the thing that is more important is work, our vocation, creation. Sometimes the thing that is more important for Aries is to not ever be left and to never feel that sense of dysregulation and loss of control that comes when we are intimate, because we fear that the other person will leave and not come back, consciously or unconsciously. So, if you are struggling to make connections, to find intimacy or a relationship, it's gonna be one of those things. Has capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy deemed you undesirable? Is it more important for you to be your authentic self, which has been deemed undesirable? Has capitalism locked you out of the market? Has whiteness made you a threat? Has patriarchy threatened and coerced you, shamed you and humiliated you, made you the target of violence? Now, I know your chart. Why would I do that? I know your chart, right? And your chart is such that, one, I don't think you're emotionally available to yourself. You are not emotionally available. And without telling all of your business, this person does have Moon in Aries and Venus in Aries. Right? So no, I don't think that Aries in and of itself indicates that. I know plenty of people with Aries who are in long-term marriages and relationships, right? But what is your particular issue? What is it that is more for anybody here, regardless of your chart, what is the thing that is more important? Sometimes that thing is that, like for me, my convictions are the most important thing. I have Venus and Jupiter and Sagittarius, both rising, Sagittarius rising. My convictions are the most important thing to me. So right now, that means nobody is even going to be an option for me if they are not currently masking. If you do not wear a mask, if you do not understand the nature of the threat of COVID, then there is, right? So that means I would rather be alone than be with someone who does not share my convictions. As a matter of fact, I can't even tolerate it, right? Because my convictions are in solidarity with disabled and immunocompromised people, right? I have my own body illness stuff. My kid does, right? So my convictions, right? So you have to examine your own chart and your own life and your own choices and your own patterns and habits. And what is the thing that is more important to you than being in an intimate relationship? There's something, even if it's just staying alive. And that's the hard part. Yes, we are entitled to love, acceptance, connection. But capitalism makes that shit fucking impossible. Whiteness is loving under duress and terror for many of us. You understand? So, tough answer, but that's just what it is. How do you express entitlement in your relationships as a 7th house Aries and the environment invalidates you? So I'm assuming that you are Libra, sidereal Libra rising, and that when you say 7th house Aries, I'm assuming you mean Aries sun. So here's the thing for Libra rising, and this could really depend on where your Mars is. But in general, Libra rising is concerned with the appearance of being in control of oneself. The appearance of being in control of one's behavior, body, and emotions. Okay? And if you have Aries in the 7th house, this can mean it's difficult for you to own and embody the parts of you that does whatever the fuck you want to do because you can. Right? So the question would be, who are the people in your life who seem to just do whatever they want to do without any care for the consequences and without any concern for how it might impact you? And then the question would be, how are you responding to that? Are you prioritizing the appearance of being in control of yourself, your feelings, your appearance? Right? Or, right? Do you feel guilty? Do you struggle to be in touch with your sense of autonomy? Normally for Libra, what is in between you and your autonomy is fear of loss of control in the eyes of other people. 2, incredible feelings of guilt due to experiences of being coerced into complying to behaviors that others demanded of you. For Libra, my thing is always see the reckless people in your life as teaching you how to be reckless. The goal is stop trying to control them and let yourself lose control over yourself. And that's a word from somebody with a bunch of Libra, so that's that on that. Oops. Do you have any thoughts about the upcoming square between Mars and Cancer and Jupiter and Aries? Yes, this is what my post on accommodation was all about. It's about accommodation. You're welcome, Ebuno no Jobi. Yep. So this square between Mars in Cancer and Jupiter in Aries, Mars enters Cancer. Ooh, my mind is back. Hallelujah. Mars enters Cancer on May 10th. It will stay there till June 30th. And Mars in Cancer will square Jupiter in Aries on May 23rd. Right? And this particular aspect is laying the groundwork for the Venus retrograde. Venus will retrograde in Cancer and in part in Leo, but it will square Jupiter in Aries 3 times. Okay? It will square Jupiter in Aries 3 times. And so in the 2023 Sidereal Astrology Guide, for Jupiter and Aries, understanding my autonomy and personal power within the context of whatever your Aries house is, okay? Let's read this paragraph. This is from the May monthly summary in the 2023 Sidereal Astrology Guide. What happens when our personal power must answer to the body first? Mars in Cancer says that you are only as autonomous as your body, your individual body, your family, and society or nation as a body of people allows you to be. Ability and disability are a matter of both individual capacities in terms of tools, functions, and skills, and societal structures. The way that societies are structured is a manifestation of their willingness or unwillingness to accommodate a variety of individual capacities. So this is the word. The word for this square, the word for the Venus-Jupiter squares is accommodation. What do you need to do what you need to do? The word is not I can't, so I won't. The word is I can, so I must. And everybody move so that I can do it. Right? I think another important thing about Mars in Cancer is that, remember, signs are establishing a hierarchy of relationship and survival priorities. So when Mars gets into Cancer, the moon is above Mars. That means mommies and women are getting some power and control in society. And since Jupiter must answer to Mars, that means that our collective sense of power as individuals, right, is answering to women, our own bodies. What is your body saying that you need to do and what you're capable of? And who needs to move to accommodate you? How are your relationships enabling you to act in accordance with your own abilities? I hope that answered your question. I have no planets in Aries or Mars in general, but I've still been feeling the movements heavy. Is it because of the house Aries is in? Yes. Right now, Jupiter is in Aries, the Sun is in Aries, Mercury is retrograde in Aries, and the North Node is also in Aries because there are eclipses in Aries. Your Aries house is on fire. That's why I'm on here talking about this today. Your Aries house is on fire. It's lit up. It's where it's at, right? Whenever Jupiter comes to a sign, this is our collective experience. It's the reference point in the context for how we're interpreting everything. So everything for the next year until next spring, we are interpreting it within the context of our autonomy and personal power. What is prohibiting me from doing what I want to fucking do? Who's stopping me? What is in the way? There are material issues that can prevent us from being autonomous, but most of those material issues are socially determined. This is why my post on accommodation says, do your relationships able you or disable you? What do you need to move about your city, your nation, your town, your country freely without undue burden? Who is in the way? Somebody is preventing you. And I'm most certain that the thing that is preventing you is capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy, period. Unless, of course, you're a capitalist, which unless you own the means of production, then you're not. Maybe if you're white, you have some freedom. Maybe if you're a man, you have some freedom. But for the most part, it doesn't matter if you're white or you're a man, capitalism is fucking your shit up. Right? So that's why. And the other part of this too is that because there is so much Aries in the sky, all of our Marses are on the line right now. All of our natal Mars placements are plugged up, juiced up right now. Okay? Do you dive into North Node, South Nodes? If so, please speak on North Node and Aries. Yes, I do dive into North Node, South Nodes. These are the nodal axis of the moon, and they are charting where the orbits of the sun and moon intersect in our birth chart. Any new or full moon in proximity to this calculated point is going to be an eclipse. If it is a new moon in proximity about 13 degrees either side of the North Node and South Node, it is going to be a solar eclipse, and if it is a full moon in proximity to the North Node and South Node, it is going to be a lunar eclipse. Okay, so the nodes in your birth chart are telling you 13 degrees either side where were the eclipses while your parents were pregnant with you, and where will the eclipses be likely within the 6 months or 18 months after you were born. Okay, particularly with regard to what is called prenatal eclipses that occurred while you were born. In order for me to fully read the North and South Node in your chart, I have to have the specifics of the chart because the rulers of your North and South Node are incredibly important. But eclipses in Aries and Libra, right, when the North Node is in Aries, the South Node is in Libra because it's an axis that is 180 degrees opposite, right? When we have eclipses in Aries and Libra, these eclipses are about power. They're about control. And in some way, shape, or form, this is talking about issues in your parental relationship, right? The relationship between your parents. The dynamics while your mother was pregnant with you have something to do with power and control. Now, I would examine the houses of your North and South Node in order to give you the main topic of this power and control, and I would examine the rulers, Mars and Venus, to fill that in. Can't do that right now, but that's what that is, right? North Node in Aries, though, particularly can definitely be about mothers' experiences of abandonment while they were pregnant, or how the pregnancy itself surfaced past wounds of abandonment and being disowned, or mother was abandoned or disowned while she was pregnant. That is for North Node and Aries specifically. My Aries is first house. So your ascendant is in Aries. With so much in Aries currently, that would be, what would be a cautionary advisement? I wouldn't necessarily say this is a cautionary advisement, because so much of that depends on specifics of the chart. You're welcome, the Miss Jenkins. So much of that depends on specifics of your chart aside from your rising sign. But in general, for first house Aries, this could just be changes in your physical appearance. This could be about changes in how you show up in relationships and figuring out how to accommodate yourself inside relationships. Like, how are you dealing with your own issues of abandonment and neglect, right? How are you confronting that inside of your relationships? How is that showing up for you? Is it showing up because you choose unavailable people? Is it showing up because you're constantly running? Or have you figured out how to accommodate your need for space and autonomy? Have you figured out how to maintain your sense of separateness inside relationships? That's what these eclipses are really about for all of us, but particularly for Aries rising, this is going to be in your primary relationships. So that's going to be in your business relationships with equals. It's going to be in your therapy relationship with your therapist or your doctor. And it is also going to be in relationship with your significant others or romantic partners, right? How are you making room for your own autonomy in ways that honor your need to feel in control? I mean, that's the word that nobody wants to say, is control. We all have a need to control, right? I am sharing this link for the Wounds and Gifts workshop, excuse me, on my Twitter. But yeah, so that's that. We'll talk though. You and me will talk. How do we combat the recklessness? Why you gotta combat it? Why you gotta fight it? What's wrong with being reckless? Leatherette, what's wrong with being reckless? Everybody needs to be a little reckless. I moved across the country out of my parents' house on my own for the first time in the middle of the pandemic, reckless as fuck. But that enabled me to do so much healing that I would have never done otherwise. Good things come from bad things come from good things, and good and bad is in the eye of the beholder. Sometimes good things turn bad, sometimes good things turn good, sometimes bad things turn good, sometimes bad things get worse, right? I think that for anything, the first step is noticing. Being able to retrospectively identify a pattern, and then to be able to, see, Leatherette, you missed the explanation. A coping strategy is not always bad. Is a cast for your broken leg a bad thing? Is a crutch to help you walk a bad thing? No, it is a coping strategy. It's a coping mechanism, right? One thing about me, Leatherette, that you may not know, I am a both and person. The binary does not serve us here. Like I just said, bad things can come from good things, right? So recklessness, in its most neutral sense, is doing something that you have no evidence that you can do because you've never done it before. Right? Now, can it be negative? Absolutely. Recklessness can be a blatant disregard for the interest of other people and of yourself. Recklessness can be a disregard of your own limits, physically, mentally, emotionally, right? Recklessness is not caring for other people or your environment. Recklessness also is the adult who is responsible for you is not there, so you don't know what to do. No one has taught you how to acknowledge your own limits and recognize them, right? So one thing we do in Divination for Liberation, the whole good, bad thing, is just not useful. Because all of it's capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy at the end of the day. So we are not going to shame ourselves, you know, for having to survive these systems. But we will do the best we can to heal as much as we can so that we can be revolution ready, right? Okay, I'm getting tired of talking, so I'm only going to ask a couple more questions. Let's see. My thoughts about Jupiter and Aries are in the 2023 Sidereal Astrology Guide, and they're also in the most recent post on my Instagram and in my Podia community that says, "Are you free?" So I'm not going to rehash that here so I can answer these other people's questions. That's the one thing I appreciate about getting older. I got that slow vibrato now. I can never do that when I was younger. I was having trouble completing projects, so to change this, I need to overestimate abilities. Well, one, you need to consider, and this is for anybody, the first thing that you need to consider is that you actually might have a disability. That disability might be somewhere on the autism spectrum or ADHD. That's the first thing that you need to consider. And those are ways that we don't conform to capitalism's means of productivity. It is a deviation from capitalist forms of productivity, right? So the answer might not be to overestimate your abilities. The answer might be to accommodate yourself. Some ways that I accommodate myself when I'm having trouble focusing on something that I really need to get done, because I straight up be procrastinating. The pressure of having 15 minutes left to do something really gets me going. But the way that I combat that is I have a timer. Where's my little timer? This is my little timer. It only goes up to like an hour, right? And I will set this timer for 10 minutes and just 10 minutes of pure focus. And sometimes it takes all of me. But when that 10 minutes goes off, I'm like, whew, okay, 5-minute break. And then I set the timer again for 10 minutes. Trying to sit and make myself focus unless it's coming naturally in the moment, right? So understand that there's nothing wrong with you. You just need an accommodation. My accommodation is a timer. Yep, sometimes when I'm really in it, I can do 25 minutes. But I can usually only do 25 minutes after I've done 10 minutes like 3 times. Because it takes that 30 minutes to get my brain to focus. Timers, y'all, use a timer, just 10 minutes. Don't try to sit down and then next thing you know, you looked up and you've been scrolling for the past hour. Accommodate yourself. Get up and walk. Sometimes we can't focus because we are sedentary and our brains don't have enough oxygen. We do not have enough novel experiences for our brain to feel motivated. So that's another thing I do. When I can't focus, I get up and go for a walk, or I clean, and then I come back to it. Okay? Accommodate yourself. That is the word for 2023. How do we get comfortable in building relationships without fearing being abandoned? Well, unfortunately, the only way the fear of abandonment is going to lessen to a tolerable amount is 2 ways. The first is that you are in a relationship and your fear of abandonment is there with you, and you somehow give yourself the opportunity to experience the other person not leaving. But oftentimes what happens in those situations is that the fear of abandonment is so strong that you like need it to happen, because that gives you a sense of control, because you know what is going to happen. So you might choose emotionally unavailable partners. You might choose people who are avoidant attachment. You might only like people who are uninterested in you, right? Or you will leave first so that you will not be left. This is all about control, okay? The other way is that you take the risk of being vulnerable with someone you love, and they leave, and you recognize you didn't die. Because your nervous system literally thinks you're going to die. That's why the fear, it's a fear of death. Your caregiver leaving and not coming back, your sense of self was not developed fully, because the necessary mirror that should have been there to reflect back to you what is age appropriate for you, and to leave and come back, so that you know the feeling of being left does not mean them never coming back. That is what you're trying to develop when you have a fear of development. You're trying to develop the tolerance for separateness, right? That does not result in you preemptively severing, or you engaging in behaviors subconsciously to get your partner to sever so that you can be right, because that's what trauma wants. The trauma wants to be right. If the trauma is right, that means it has an accurate sense of what the world is, and it can be in control. So the trauma's like, you know they're going to leave and not come back, so you better leave first. Or matter of fact, why don't you just choose people who never come? Or people who come and go, right? So always, it's really noticing your own habits and patterns. We cannot control what other people do, but we can notice our own habits and patterns. And that's really where to start. Excellent question. Can you discuss Mars in Aries 8th house, since the 8th house topics aren't people? Yes, I can. This is for anybody who is Virgo rising and has Aries on the 8th house. Your challenge is learning how to be dependent. How are you learning how to be dependent without guilt or shame? How are you learning to accept material help? How are you learning how to share? How are you learning to maintain your autonomy in situations where someone has the power and control over your food and material well-being? How are you learning how to be autonomous and dependent? I think that's good enough. Who are some vital historical figures with prominent Aries you think we should learn about and see how we can learn from them? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Sidereal Aries rising with Jupiter in Aries. Malcolm X, Moon and Mercury in Aries. Muhammad Ali, Cancer rising, Saturn and Mars in Aries. That's all I can think about right now. Real talk. For my Virgo moon rising, a lot of fortune people, how are you using your dependence as an excuse for pretending like you can't do what you know you can do? How are you using your dependence on other people as an excuse for not doing what you want to do? Did somebody lock you and tie you down? Or do you just feel guilty for being dependent because this cult of individualism has convinced you that this should only be a temporary circumstance, and that the morally and ethically right circumstance is that you depend on no one and you have your own? Are you suffering unnecessarily because you don't like the way that sharing or being dependent makes you feel? Do you spend your time ruminating on how to get yourself out of the dependent situation rather than learning how to say thank you? This Aries is coming for all of us. Nadia, you have every right to fear being dependent. Absolutely. Absolutely. Look at your chart. Look at your life. What has happened to you when you've been dependent on other people? What has happened to you? You got enough Virgo for that to be for you, Marisa. Right? We treat dependence like a temporary sickness that we have to babysit with our thoughts, lest we become or be caught being comfortable being dependent on somebody else. Someone said, Virgo rising, it just makes me feel guilty being dependent and can't trust people either. You're holding yourself back, Chunky Warlock. You're holding yourself back. This is why we have an impossible disability benefits program in this country, because we treat being dependent as a sickness in and of itself. Whose responsibility is it to enforce the boundaries done detailed? And what is a boundary? Yes, there is the sense of control and who has control. But here's the thing. If somebody is controlling you with their resources, that is called coercion. If somebody is not controlling you with their resources, yet you feel incapable of doing what you want to do, then it is you holding you back. I'm going to say that again. If someone is controlling you with their food, money, or material resources, that is called coercion. But if they are not controlling you with their food, money, or resources, you are not being coerced. You are the problem. So what is it that you're doing? What are you doing? If you have security, that should be the base upon which you do all the things you want to do. But if you are being coerced, then it is not secure. Because if you don't comply, you won't have what you need. You see what I'm saying? Any advice for your friends with Venus and Aries? Yes, consider the fact that you might be autistic, and that's why relationships are very hard for you. Also consider the fact that you may not like yourself, and so anyone too similar to you makes you feel disgust. Also consider the fact that love and acceptance, you were expected to furnish that for yourself. Right? My question for Venus and Aries is, do you like you? Have you been shown how to like yourself? Or were you expected to develop that on your own? When you have Venus and Aries, your hierarchy of relationship and survival priorities is such that your autonomy is more important than togetherness. Why is that? Because togetherness led to abandonment. But seriously, my unpopular opinion for the day is that neurotypicality does not exist. The original concept of neurodiversity is to describe the nature of humans. We are a neurodiverse species, necessarily so for survival. So when I talk about autism or ADHD or neurodiversity, I'm talking about everything is a script. Every social construct is full of scripts. Capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy determines those scripts. And your proximity to capitalists, your proximity to whiteness, and your proximity to maleness is what is going to make those scripts easy for you. Or you can totally say, fuck the scripts, and your proximity to those things are going to permit you to be accepted and rewarded anyway. So particularly in relationships, when we're talking about Aries, there really is a way that something about you is different. Something about you is different. And whatever that thing about you that was different makes it really hard for you to like yourself, because you think the thing that makes you different is the reason why people keep leaving you. So my last thing for people with Venus and Aries, can you actually tolerate somebody liking you? Can you tolerate somebody liking you? And if the answer is no, start there. Investigate that. Why can you not tolerate somebody liking you? What does that bring up for you? Probably something around control. What's the significance of the lot of fortune? The lot of fortune is a calculated point that takes the lunar phase, the number of degrees between the sun and moon, and adds or subtracts it to the ascendant degree, depending on whether you were born at night or during the day. At night means after sunset, before sunrise. During the day means after sunrise, but before sunset. If you are born after sunrise and before sunset, you take the number of degrees between the sun and moon and add it to the ascendant, and the point that you come to is the lot of fortune. If you were born after sunset but before sunrise, you take the degrees between the sun and moon and subtract it from the degree of the ascendant, and the sign and degree you land on will be the lot of fortune. Similarly to the north and south node, because the lot of fortune is a calculated point that is taken from the sun and moon, mother and father, the lot of fortune, my working theory here is that the lot of fortune is who are you to your parents? And what does that mean about how you show up in the world? When I say who are you to your parents, it's saying something about the nature of their relationship at the time that you were born and what you're coming into the world meant for them and their relationship. And that becomes a prototype for how you show up in the world. It can say a lot about your vocation. Why parents? Because it's a calculated point that is taken from the number of degrees between the sun and the moon. Sun is dad, mom is moon. Aries in my 9th house, without any planets, any connection between feeling stuck, lust for travel. Can't necessarily say that. I would say more, what are the themes around coercion, compliance, and abandonment in your family of origin? This says more about your sense of belonging and the role that control and compliance play in your family. And the 9th house feeling like a way to get free from the control and coercion power dynamics of your upbringing that often show up in other places in your life. So yeah. All right, y'all. I'm gonna go now. This is great. I will save this and you will be able to view this later. Always send a tip if you feel like this blessed you. The Wounds and Gifts workshop is now 40% off. I just shared the link on Twitter. And yeah, this is Divination for Liberation, my friends. Welcome. You're welcome, Sarah. You're welcome. Good night. See you all later.